Life can seem like it's pretty out of control sometimes. If you look at the video behind me, you see what's kind of common in nature to have a bird make its nest not too far away from a waterfall. If you've ever been to a waterfall, you know how powerful they can be. I mean, that water really brings a lot of force with it. And that little nest right there, if it was just a little bit closer to that waterfall, it would just get washed away in a second and all those little birds would be lost. But that doesn't happen. For as close as danger is, they're safe. It becomes actually a great place for it to be because it's safe from its predators. It's amazing how often in life things can look like that waterfall, just completely out of control, and you can feel like you're just inches, moments away from being swept away. But you have God on your side. Today we're going to have an opportunity to see a situation where it seems to the disciples things are just spiraling out of control. We're going to see Jesus betrayed and then arrested and sentenced to die. And we're going to see the disciples scattered, and it seems like everything just got out of God's grasp, but that never happens. And Jesus makes that clear. Time after time, he gives them these subtle reminders that everything had to happen just as it happened so Scripture could be fulfilled. For as much as it seems to be out of control, it never is. And that's why we can rely upon God. You see, today we're going to have a chance to see Peter and the disciples' overconfidence, their confidence in themselves. And we'll see the difference between that and what it means to trust in a God who always keeps his word, who always has everything in control. We'll begin by seeing Jesus celebrating the Passover with his disciples and consider why he does it this way. We'll start reading in Mark chapter 14, verse 12. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when it was customary to sacrifice a Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, telling him, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He'll show you a large upstairs room, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. You know, Jesus didn't have to do it this way. The city would have been full with the celebration of the Passover, and him telling them that he doesn't have it all set to go yet. Maybe the disciples would have thought there's no way they're going to get to celebrate it. But Jesus shows something. He knows all. He sees all. He knew exactly where that man would be and exactly how it would go. It's a subtle reminder that none of this was a surprise. As is the next section, we continue. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened, and one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me." "It is one of the 12, he replied. "One who dips bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Jesus does two things here. First of all, he gives the disciples the opportunity to see that he knows exactly what is happening. That while Judas betraying Jesus would have come as a shock to all of them, Jesus knew exactly what was happening. It was another subtle reminder that nothing was out of control. But this was also for Judas. One last chance for him to repent, to come to his senses. You see, Jesus knew what he was going to do, but God's foreknowledge doesn't take away our responsibility for our actions and our decisions. Jesus, even at this moment, is reaching out to Judas. He loves even him. Today we're going to explore the story of Peter. We won't have a chance to look much as Judas' story, but remember how Judas' story ends. He feels bad about betraying Jesus. He goes to the religious leaders, tries to confess his sin. They say, "What is that to us?" And in despair, he goes and he hangs himself. And it's all for no reason, because Jesus died on the cross for Judas' sin too. The problem wasn't what Judas did. It was that he thought it was so bad it couldn't be forgiven. Now we see Jesus continue, after talking about what Jesus was going to do, with giving them a gift and us a gift that we continue to hold on to this day. A reminder that while Jesus ran his race to the cross alone, he did that so we will know we'll never be alone. We read about that in the very next section. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." Jesus walks out that door and into the night. And what a tragic thing it is for him to be alone. But then Jesus gives him this supper that reminds us that in this world we'll never be alone. As he gives them the sacrament of Holy Communion, he gives them and us this amazing gift where God gives us a price of the salvation of the world, Jesus' body and blood, and he gives it to us to eat and to drink. And he does that for a reason. How many times don't you wonder whether God is really with you, whether what he says in his word really applies to you, whether he can really forgive you? But what's beautiful about the sacraments is that there's a physical connection tied to the promise. That in the waters of baptism, that water touches your head. And in the bread and wine of the Lord's Supper, you eat that bread and you drink that wine. And Jesus says it's through that bread and that wine that you receive the true body and blood of Jesus in a miraculous way. So you could know it's yours. So you could know that the price of the forgiveness of the sins of the world was given to you to eat and to drink. So you could know that because of that, your sin is forgiven. So you could know that you are one with God and that you'll never be alone. What a beautiful gift that is. What a huge part that is of our Christian life. And in your class, you're going to have an opportunity to discuss that a little bit. The story continues, and we have an opportunity to see now the danger of overconfidence. And Jesus, he talks about what's going to happen in the very next section. He says, "You'll all fall away," Jesus told them. "For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I've risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself would disown me 3 times. Peter insisted emphatically, "Even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you." And all the others said the same. It was funny, before when Jesus said, "This night one of you are going to betray me," the disciples, one after the other, said, "Surely not I, Lord." And whether they realized it or not, that there's a good kind of humility in their question. Perhaps an understanding that we're always capable of the worst kinds of evil, that while we are children of God, we also have a sinful nature that is black, and our struggles with it are daily. But here you see a complete 180. And you see the ugliness of overconfidence. As Jesus tells them they're all going to scatter, they're all going to abandon him. And Peter says, "Surely not me. Even if everyone else does, I never will." His confidence was not found in Jesus. His confidence was found in himself. Think back to that opening picture of that nest by that waterfall. It's as if one of those baby birds decides, I can take on that water on my own, and they jump out. What's going to happen? They'll be washed away. Peter was putting himself in a very dangerous situation. Trust in oneself. Jesus is going to talk more about that. We continue in the Garden of Gethsemane. It says he went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." In the Garden of Gethsemane, we're going to see 2 different approaches to struggle. We'll see Jesus, who does 2 things. Number 1, he wants his Christian companions with him. He asks them to sit up with him. He understands the need to be encouraged by fellow Christians. But 2, he goes to God in prayer. And he leaves the whole thing in God's hand. His prayer over and over again is not what I will, but what you will. He's not afraid to ask what he's thinking about, but he ultimately leaves it in God's hands. This is trust. And it's the opposite of the overconfidence we just saw from Peter. And we see where that leaves Jesus compared to the disciples in the next section. It says in Mark 14, "Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Simon, he said to Peter, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Peter, for all of his self-reliance, what does it do? It leaves him asleep, unaware of the danger they were in, of the moment in which they found themselves. Jesus warns him, watch, because the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. You see what he means? As Christians, you and I want to do what God has called us to do. That's called our new man. And we have the desire to be who God has called us to be. Read in Romans chapter 7 as Paul talks about wanting to do what he should do. And yet we also have a sinful nature that is 100% black and evil. And the devil is good at getting us to follow his desires. You see, a Christian knows who we are in Christ. We know what it means to live as a child of God, and we want to do that. But we also remember that our battle is a daily one as we struggle with our sinful nature. And if we're going to win that battle, it's not going to be because of the power of ourselves. Peter and the disciples, they didn't get that. And look what happens next. Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he found them again sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They didn't know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Jesus handles the situation in perfect faith, and he's ready. Peter and the disciples rely upon themselves, and they have no idea what's coming to them, even though Jesus had warned them over and over again. It leaves them teetering on the brink of disaster. We continue in Mark 14. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is a man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing nearby drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you've come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled, and a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. You see where their overconfidence led them? It made liars out of them. It made fools out of them. It scattered them into the darkness, and alone in the dark is no place to be in this world. But Jesus promises that we'll never be alone. You see, he walked that road to the cross alone, and as you read through the rest of this section of Mark, you can read about the way that he does that. About how he faces the leaders of the people, how he faces Pontius Pilate, how he's arrested and sentenced to death. And as he stands there alone, abandoned by his own disciples, he stands there alone for you so you could know that you'll never be alone. Something that Peter needed to remember in this next section. We continue in Mark 14, going to verse 53. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. Peter runs, but he musters the courage to come and follow Jesus. And so he kind of hangs out in the back, waiting to see what's going to happen, warming himself by the fire, trying to stay inconspicuous, out of the way so no one notices him, trying to muster up the courage to be who he called himself not that long earlier. And it ends up being the pressure of a servant girl, probably a girl that today would be in middle school, that proves to be too much. We continue in verse 66. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also are with that Nazarene, Jesus, she said. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you're a Galilean. He began to call down curses and swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you'll disown me 3 times. And he broke down and he wept. This is where overconfidence leads. If you trust in yourself, at some point the forces of evil will wash you away. We are no contest when it comes to a battle between us and the devil. But it's never just us and the devil. In the sacrament of Holy Communion, Jesus gives you his body and blood to promise you that you are his, that forgiveness is yours, and you are one with him, and he is one with you. Through his word, he promises you that he's with you always. In your baptism, he wrapped his arms around you. He made you his child. Jesus walks his road to the cross alone, so you will never be alone. In your study, you're going to have an opportunity to talk about this fact, as well as the way we struggle with overconfidence. But remember the end of this story. Peter, for as much as he made a fool out of himself, he's forgiven by Jesus, reinstated by Jesus. For as much as he may have failed, Jesus didn't fail him. God's blessings on your study.